If you ask me what I value most in people, I'll answer without hesitation loyalty. It wasn't some abstract ideal I picked up from books or movies. It was the way I was raised. My mother, a woman who worked two jobs to keep us afloat after my father left, used to tell me, if you give someone your time, Johanna, you're giving them a piece of your life you'll never get back. So give it wisely. Those words shaped me. They're the reason I've never believed in half measures when it comes to love. If I commit, I give all of myself. That's why when I met Ronald, I thought I had found someone worth the risk. He wasn't like me, steady, careful, always planning 2 steps ahead. No, Ronald was the kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately command it. He was funny, magnetic, the type of person who never had to fight for attention because attention naturally bent toward him. I'm quieter, more grounded. I'm the kind of woman who remembers birthdays without needing Facebook reminders, who brings soup when someone's sick, who doesn't leave people stranded. In a way, I thought Ronald and I complemented each other. He was the spark, and I was the steady flame. That balance felt right, at least in the beginning. We started dating after a few months of knowing each other. It wasn't some whirlwind affair, the kind of thing you see in movies with passionate declarations under the rain. Ours was steady, dependable, something that felt safe to build on. He joked more than once that I was like his wife already. I'd take that as a compliment because truthfully I wanted to be. I wasn't interested in wasting time, his or mine. The early days felt almost sweetly ordinary. I'd cook dinner while he sprawled on my couch with his laptop teasing me about over-seasoning. I drove him to work when his car broke down and stayed up late helping him polish his presentations when he was nervous about a big client. I thought that's what love meant, being each other's safety net, and I was proud of being dependable. But loyalty is funny. You think it's a gift, but to the wrong person, it's just a cushion they think they can fall back on without consequence. The signs started small, the kind of things you brush off because you don't want to seem paranoid. Ronald had always been attached to his phone, but suddenly it was different. He smirked at texts, these small half smiles that didn't belong to memes or work chats. When I leaned over during movie nights, he tilted the screen away just slightly enough to notice, not enough to confront. The first time I asked, I tried to keep it light. Who are you always texting these days? I nudged, curling closer to him on the couch. He didn't even look up. Relax, Johanna. Not everyone's life revolves around you. It wasn't just what he said, it was the bite in his tone, sharp, defensive, like I had crossed a line by even noticing. My heart tightened, but I swallowed the sting. I told myself he was stressed, maybe talking to a friend about something private, maybe even planning a surprise for me. That's what you do when you love someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt. But then came the digs, subtle at first, then sharper. Out with his friends, he'd laugh and say things like, "Don't mind Johanna, she's too serious to have fun. If it weren't for me, she'd probably stay home organizing her bookshelf all night." His friends would chuckle. I would smile too, though it felt like smiling with glass in my throat. One night at dinner, I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Hey," I said gently, "could we put our phones away for just a little while? I feel like I haven't really talked to you all week." He rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair as though I'd asked for something outrageous. "God, you're so clingy sometimes. It's not a big deal." That word clingy landed harder than he realized. I wasn't a woman who clung. I was a woman who stayed. There's a difference, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't care enough to know it. Still, I didn't argue. I nodded, withdrew my hand, and let him scroll in silence while my food went cold. But inside, a shift began. A quiet, dangerous shift. I'd always imagined betrayal as a sudden rupture, like a glass, shattering, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. But with Ronald, it started like a hairline crack in porcelain. Invisible to most, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. And slowly it widened. The truth was coming. I didn't know it yet, but I was standing on the edge of discovering exactly what I meant to Ronald, and it wasn't what I thought. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that should have been forgettable, ordinary, the kind of day that wouldn't normally carry enough weight to split your life in two. Ronald had been complaining for weeks that the Bluetooth in his car wouldn't sync. "Johanna, you're better at tech stuff than me. Can you fix it?" Every time I try, the stupid thing freezes. So there I was, standing in his apartment holding his phone while he rummaged in the kitchen for snacks. He'd left it unlocked, which wasn't unusual. We trusted each other, or at least I thought we did. I scrolled through the settings trying to pair the device. That's when my eyes caught something by accident. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't searching. My gaze just landed there. His contacts list had popped up briefly, and my name stared back at me. Not just Johanna or Johanna like I might have expected. No. Next to my number, in clear, bold letters, he had saved me as Plan B. I froze. For a second, my brain refused to process it. It felt surreal, like seeing your own name graffitied on a wall you never visited. Plan B, I whispered under my breath. My chest tightened. Ronald returned, just then munching on chips, casual as ever. I turned the screen toward him, my hand shaking slightly. Ronald, what is this? He glanced at the phone, and instead of flinching, instead of showing even the smallest trace of embarrassment, he laughed. Actually laughed. Oh my God, he said between chuckles. You weren't supposed to see that. I blinked. My voice came out lower, strained. You saved me as Plan B. What the hell does that mean? He shrugged, brushing it off like I'd caught him with a typo. Relax. It's just a joke. A joke. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stand straighter. So, I'm not your girlfriend. What, your backup plan? Ronald grinned, shaking his head like I was being overly dramatic. Come on, Johanna. Don't act like you didn't know your role. You're dependable, reliable. You're always there for me. That's why you're Plan B. The air felt heavy pressing down on me. My throat tightened as if invisible hands were squeezing it. Plan B implies there's a Plan A, I managed. Exactly. He leaned against the counter, arms folded so smug it made my skin crawl. Plan A is, well, let's just say she's a bit more exciting, more spontaneous. But you're the one I can count on. You'll always be around, even if things don't work out with her. He delivered those words with such casual arrogance, like he was explaining the rules of some game I should have already known I was playing. I stared at him, the room tilting slightly, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every late-night smirk at his phone, every dismissive eye roll when I asked for his attention, it all crystallized into a single brutal truth. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't his choice. I wasn't even his equal. I was insurance. And the worst part, he thought I'd accept it. He thought being dependable meant I'd stay, no matter how deeply he disrespected me. I can't believe you, I whispered. Ronald snatched his phone back, grinning like he'd just pulled a harmless prank. Don't be so sensitive, Johanna. It's funny. You're overreacting. Overreacting. That word cut deep because it told me everything. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even concerned. He genuinely believed I had no choice but to laugh along with him. But I didn't laugh. I didn't scream. I didn't throw his phone across the room, even though my hands itched to. Instead, I did something far worse in his eyes. I set the car keys on the counter, picked up my jacket, and walked out the door without another word. Johanna, he called after me, incredulous. Are you seriously leaving over this? Wow, you're dramatic. His voice followed me down the hall, laced with mockery, but I didn't turn back. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cause a scene. I simply left him there, laughing at his own cruelty. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted. On the drive home, my mind replayed every moment with him, but now with a new lens. The teasing in front of his friends, the defensiveness when I asked about his phone, the way he called me clingy for wanting his attention, it all fit neatly into a puzzle I had never wanted to solve. He never saw me as his partner. He saw me as his safety net, his backup plan. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the car, and just sat there in the dark for a long time. My phone buzzed once, Ronald's name flashing on the screen. I didn't pick up. The silence inside my car was deafening, but it was also clarifying. For the first time, I realized I didn't need to fight for an explanation. He had already told me exactly who he was, and the only question left was whether I'd believe him. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my face pale, my eyes hard. A quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered, "This is the moment. Choose yourself." So I did. I let the phone buzz, watched his name light up the screen, and then I set it face down. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be anyone's Plan B ever again. But Ronald had no idea how much my silence was about to unravel his perfect little game. I didn't answer Ronald's calls that night, or the next, or the day after. At first, my silence was an act of survival. I didn't trust myself not to cry, not to let him twist my words, not to be pulled back into his orbit with the force of his charm. But as the hours passed, then days, I realized something startling silence had power. It was louder than anything I could have said. On the third day, a text finally came through. Ronald. So we're not talking now, over something so stupid. I read it once, then locked my screen. No reply. The more he tried to bait me, the calmer I became. I knew if I answered, it would give him exactly what he wanted, a foothold. And I refused to be dragged back into the role he had carved out for me, Reliable, predictable, always there. So I stayed silent. Of course, Ronald wasn't the type to take rejection quietly. Within a week, his social media exploded with pictures of him and a new girl. Plan A. Her name was Kara, though I didn't know that at first. I learned it secondhand through the whispers of mutual friends and the sharp sting of tagged photos that made their way onto my feed. Clinking glasses at bars, late night selfies with captions like upgrade, him kissing her cheek in neon lit clubs. Kara's arms slung around his neck, her grin wide, his smile calculated. It didn't take a detective to know what he was trying to do. He wasn't just flaunting her, he was performing for me. The message was clear. See, Johanna. You were right. You really were a plan B. My stomach twisted every time one of those photos appeared, and yet I forced myself to look only once, twice at most. Then I would close the app and remind myself, you already knew who he was. Don't give him more space inside you. But the hardest part wasn't seeing him with her. It was hearing what he told our friends. Johanna's always been too clingy. She freaked out over a contact name like, who does that? She's dramatic. Kara gets me in ways Johanna never did. Some of those words trickled back to me through Jenna, a mutual acquaintance. The same Jenna who had once cheered for us, who now messaged me late one night. Ronald says you're blowing things out of proportion. Honestly, Johanna, maybe he's right. It was just a joke. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. A joke doesn't require a backup girlfriend. That's not funny. That's pathetic. Jenna never replied, and that was when I knew he was rewriting the story. To his circle, I wasn't the betrayed girlfriend anymore. I was the clingy, dramatic one who couldn't take a joke. It stung. Of course it did. But my silence became my shield. Instead of fighting his narrative, I built a new one of my own. I poured myself into work, taking projects I had once shied away from. The office, once a place that felt routine, became a space where I could breathe without being tethered to him. I stayed later, volunteered for new clients, and slowly, almost without realizing it, my boss began to notice. You've stepped up lately, Johanna, she said one afternoon, sliding a new assignment onto my desk. I started exercising again, something I had let slip while trying to fit into Ronald's chaotic social life. Mornings at the gym turned into evenings where my body felt strong in ways my heart hadn't in months. And most importantly, I reconnected with friends I had neglected. Friday nights, that once belonged to Ronald's parties, now belonged to wine glasses and laughter with women who had known me long before him. They didn't ask me to explain, they just let me be. The silence that began as survival grew into something else: comfort, strength, freedom. Meanwhile, Ronald's carefully curated show began to falter. At first, his posts with Kara were constant every weekend, every night, sometimes twice a day. But then the frequency slowed. The captions grew vague. A month later, there were no more selfies, no more wine glass clinks, just a single post with black text on a white background. Some people aren't who they seem. I didn't need details. I knew exactly what had happened. Men like Ronald never change their patterns. Kara wasn't his first plan A, and she wouldn't be his last. She was simply the next placeholder in a game he thought he was winning. And now, as the cracks began to show, I felt no desire to swoop in, no pity that made me want to answer his calls. Because while he had been flaunting, I had been healing. One night, lying in bed with my phone on the nightstand, I stared at the ceiling and let the truth settle over me. Ronald wasn't chasing me because he loved me. He was flaunting Kara because he wanted to remind me of my place. He wanted to keep me small, keep me tethered, keep me waiting. But I wasn't waiting anymore. The silence had shifted. It wasn't about him, it was about me. I was starting to realize that the most dangerous thing you can give someone like Ronald isn't anger, it isn't confrontation, it isn't even revenge. It's indifference. And little did I know my indifference was about to unravel him more than any scream or tear ever could. Ronald always needed an audience. Without one, he wasn't Ronald. For weeks, I'd watched from a distance as his curated fairy tale with Kara unraveled in slow motion. The posts grew fewer, the smiles less convincing. Then, as predictably as a clock striking midnight, the pictures vanished altogether. In their place came cryptic updates. Not everyone you trust deserves it. Loyalty is rare. Hold on tight if you find it. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. And then the calls started. The first one came just after midnight. My phone lit up with his name vibrating on the nightstand. I stared at it until it went dark. Minutes later, a voicemail notification. Against my better judgment, I listened. His voice was slurred heavy with liquor. Johanna. Hey, look, I know I messed up, but you know me. You know I didn't mean it like that. I need you. Call me back, okay? I deleted it. The second voicemail was angrier. So that's it. You're just gonna ignore me. After everything I did for you. You're really that cold. I deleted that one too. But by the fifth call in 2 days, I didn't need to listen anymore. His desperation leaked through the timestamps alone calls at 2 a.m., 3:15, 4:47. He was unraveling, and the silence he once mocked was crushing him. And me, for the first time in months, I was thriving. At work, my boss had pulled me into her office with a smile I hadn't seen directed at me before. Johanna, I've been impressed. You've handled the Martinez account flawlessly. I want you to take on a bigger role. Think you're ready? I nodded. Though inside my heart pounded with something that wasn't fear, it was excitement. The kind Ronald had never once inspired in me. My evenings, once eaten up by his parties and his friends, were now mine to shape. I filled them with things that nourished me: yoga classes, books, gathering dust on my shelves, long walks under the city lights. And slowly something unexpected began to happen. I noticed Adrian. He was a coworker I'd barely given thought to before, a quiet, thoughtful man who rarely raised his voice in meetings, but always asked the kind of questions that made everyone else pause. Unlike Ronald, Adrian didn't need a spotlight. He seemed content just doing his work well, treating people with respect. One evening, after a late client call, we ended up walking out of the office together. He noticed the fatigue in my face and said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but you look like someone who's been carrying too much." I laughed softly, surprised by the kindness. That obvious. He smiled, not the practice kind Ronald used, but something warmer. Only to someone who knows what it looks like. That night, as I drove home, I realized how foreign it felt to be seen without being mocked, respected without strings attached. I wasn't falling in love, not yet, but for the first time I could see the possibility of something different, something healthier, something that didn't leave me doubting my worth every second. Meanwhile, Ronald's downfall accelerated. Mutual friends told me Kara had left him after discovering he'd been messaging other women. Shocking, I know. Apparently, she hadn't found it funny to be slotted into his little Plan A B game. She wasn't dependable, so when his thrill-seeking backfired, she cut him off swiftly. That's when Ronald turned his energy back to me, as though I'd been waiting in the wings. One night, just as I was curling up with a book, a knock echoed through my apartment. When I opened the door, Ronald stood there. His hair was disheveled, eyes, bloodshot phone clutched in one hand, like it was the only thing tethering him to earth. "Johanna," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, just let me in." I didn't move aside. I didn't reach for him. I simply stared. "There's nothing for you here, Ronald." His eyes flashed with anger, the mask slipping. "Are you seriously this cold?" "After everything I did for you." I tilted my head, my voice calm. "Everything you did to me, you mean." He scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "You're acting like I'm some monster. I just made a mistake." "No," I said softly. "You made a choice, over and over again. And now you're living with it." His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but no words came. He just stood there, a shell of the man who once thought he was untouchable. I closed the door. This time I locked it. As I leaned against the wood heart steady, I realized something profound. Ronald wasn't chasing me because he loved me. He was chasing me because I was the only one left. But I wasn't his fallback anymore. I was free. And while his world shrank, mine was just beginning to expand. After that night at my door, Ronald didn't vanish. If anything, my silence seemed to provoke him more. The calls multiplied. One night, 7 in a row. I let them ring, each one vibrating the nightstand like a small earthquake. The voicemails piled up, each more erratic than the last. The first was pleading. "Johanna, please just pick up. I just want to explain. You know me. You know I didn't mean it like that." By the third, his tone had hardened. "You're really going to throw away everything we had over a stupid joke? You're proving me right. You are dramatic." By the fifth, the venom came out. "Fine, be stubborn. But don't think anyone else will put up with you the way I did." And by the seventh, his voice broke into something I almost didn't recognize, sniffling ragged breaths. I just need you. You were always there for me. Please, Johanna, don't leave me like this." I sat in the dark, staring at my phone long after the last message ended. Once those words would have gutted me. Once I would have rushed to reassure him, to comfort the man unraveling on the other end of the line. But not anymore. Now I heard what lay beneath every plea and every insult: desperation, yes, but not love. Ronald didn't miss me. He missed the certainty of me. He missed the safety net he thought I'd always be. And for the first time, I realized how dangerous it had been to give someone like him that kind of certainty. A week later, his tactics shifted. He stopped calling, but instead, one evening, I came home to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a handwritten letter, pages of scrawled apologies, crossed out sentences, desperate justifications. His handwriting was uneven, rushed, like he'd poured it out in one frantic sitting. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Plan B was just a nickname. You know, I never wanted to hurt you. I realize now that you're the only one who ever made me feel safe. Kara didn't care about me the way you did. No one has. If you still care at all, meet me at the cafe tomorrow at 6. If you don't show up, I'll know it's really over. I read the letter twice. The first time I felt my pulse race, old instincts urging me to soothe, to fix, to give him the closure he was demanding. But the second time I caught the patterns. It wasn't an apology, it was a manipulation. Every line twisted to remind me of my role, the caretaker, the fallback, the dependable one. Even in written words, he couldn't help but center himself. I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and set it in the recycling bin. The next day at 6, I stayed home. When my phone buzzed hours later, I didn't even bother opening the message. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what it would say. More promises, more excuses, more attempts to reel me back into his orbit. But I was already gone. Meanwhile, life had other plans for me. At work, Adrian and I began crossing paths more often. Not by design, just by circumstance, late nights on overlapping projects, coffee runs during long meetings, brief conversations in the elevator. One evening, I dropped a stack of files in the hallway, and he knelt without hesitation to help me gather them. Our hands brushed, and I caught him glancing at me with something almost like concern. You always take on too much, he said softly. I smiled faintly. Better than taking on too little. He shook his head. There's a difference between working hard and carrying everyone else's weight. You deserve someone who knows that. The words lingered long after he walked away, not because they were romantic, they weren't, but because they carried something Ronald had never once offered me recognition. Adrian saw me not as a fallback, not as a safety net, but as a person with worth on her own. That contrast was like sunlight streaming through a crack in a dark room. And yet, even as I began to step into that light, Ronald's shadow loomed. Mutual friends reached out again, this time with guilt in their voices. He's not doing well, Johanna. Maybe just talk to him. He needs closure. Closure. The word made me laugh bitterly. Closure isn't owed. Closure isn't a gift you hand to someone who shattered your trust. Closure is something you build yourself brick by brick until the wall between you and the past stands tall enough that nothing can climb over. Ronald wanted me to give him closure because he couldn't create it on his own. He wanted me to patch the wound he inflicted, then thank him for letting me try. But I wasn't his nurse anymore. I wasn't his safety net. I wasn't his plan B. And the more desperate he grew, the clearer that truth became. One night, he left another letter, not taped to my door this time, but slipped under it. This one was different. Not an apology, not a plea, a confession. He wrote about how every relationship he'd ever had was a game to him, how he'd always kept a plan A and a plan B, sometimes even a plan C. He admitted he thought it made him clever, invincible. But now he wrote, "You're the first one who actually left, and it scares me that you might be the last person who ever will." I sat there on my kitchen floor, letter trembling in my hands, and realized something chilling. Ronald wasn't chasing me because he loved me. He was chasing me because for the first time his game had failed. And that failure was eating him alive. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer, not to keep, but as a reminder. A reminder of the line I had crossed, the one that separated who I had been from who I was becoming. Because Ronald's confessions weren't my burden anymore. They were his. I didn't answer Ronald's letters. I didn't call him back. I didn't give him the conversation he craved. And with every day of silence, I felt something inside me grow steadier, stronger. He wanted closure, but closure wasn't mine to give. It wasn't some neat bow I could tie on a broken box and hand back to him. Closure was his responsibility. Mine was to keep walking forward. So that's what I did. At first, it was strange living without the constant noise of him. I hadn't realized how much space he had occupied in my head until the silence left room for other things. The mornings weren't heavy anymore. I no longer jolted awake to buzzing phones at midnight. My apartment felt different, like it belonged to me again. And into that quiet, new things began to grow. Adrian was one of them. We never rushed it, never forced it. It wasn't some dramatic rebound or a desperate attempt to prove something. It was slow, almost imperceptible, like spring thawing into bloom. One evening after we'd wrapped a late project, he offered me a ride home. I almost refused out of habit, too used to carrying everything alone. But when I saw the genuine ease in his eyes, I said yes. The drive was quiet, comfortable. No loud music, no interruptions from a buzzing phone, no need to fill the silence with empty chatter, just the soft hum of the engine and the occasional glance between us. When he dropped me off, I hesitated, then said, Adrian, why are you always so kind to me? He shrugged lightly, like it was obvious. Because you deserve it. That night, lying in bed, I realized how starved I'd been for something that simple. Respect, consideration. To be treated as enough without having to prove it, beg for it, or compete for it. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a seed, and it was enough. Meanwhile, Ronald's spiral continued. I didn't follow him online anymore, but mutual friends whispered updates, their voices tinged with discomfort. He was drinking more, lashing out cycling through short-lived flings that burned out as quickly as they began. One mutual acquaintance stopped me in the grocery store, eyes wide. Johanna, he's not the same. He blames everyone but himself, says you ruined him. And I smiled faintly, though inside I felt the weight of those words. Ruined him. No, I thought. He ruined himself. All I did was step away from the wreckage. The difference between us became clearer with every passing week. While he scrambled for validation, I built stability. While he clung to chaos, I chose peace. One Saturday morning, I took myself to a small cafe I'd always meant to visit but never had time for. I sat by the window with a book, sipping coffee, slowly savoring the quiet. It felt indulgent, almost rebellious to do something just for me. As I watched the street outside, I realized something profound. I no longer needed Ronald's absence to define me. I no longer needed his silence to feel powerful. I had reclaimed myself. And Ronald, he could keep chasing ghosts. The last time he tried to reach me, it wasn't a call or a letter. It was a message delivered through a friend. He says he's sorry. He says he just wants to talk just once to explain. I shook my head. No, there's nothing left to explain. Because the truth was simple. Ronald wasn't knocking on my door or filling my inbox because of love. He was doing it because for the first time he had lost control, and he couldn't stand it. But his chaos wasn't mine to manage anymore. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want the kind of closure that demanded I sit across from him one more time, watching him twist his words until I doubted myself again. No, my closure was already here. It lived in my laughter with friends, in the steady rhythm of my mornings, in the growing warmth of Adrian's quiet presence. Closure was choosing peace over chaos. Closure was choosing myself. And the silence I gave Ronald, that was my final answer. Months passed. Seasons shifted. What once felt like an open wound became nothing more than a faint scar, visible, but no longer painful. I hadn't heard from Ronald in weeks. At first, I thought the silence was another tactic, another performance meant to draw me back in. But this time it wasn't a game. This time he had finally run out of moves. It was a mutual acquaintance who told me what became of him. We bumped into each other at a networking event, the kind of place Ronald used to thrive in. Over wine glasses and polite chatter, the friend leaned closer and said, "Have you heard about him?" I shook my head. He's not doing well. Kara wants nothing to do with him. The others too. He's burned bridges everywhere. He sits at the same bar most nights, bitter, telling anyone who'll listen that people are ungrateful, that women don't understand loyalty. The words landed with a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because it didn't have to be this way. Relief because I had finally escaped being dragged down into his spiral. I pictured him there, hunched over a glass, blaming the world, still convinced he was the victim of his own schemes. A man who once thought he was untouchable, now stranded in the ruins of the games he played. And me, I wasn't stranded. I had built something steady, something that felt